What happens when one of the greatest minds in psychology reveals deep truths about the feminine side of human existence? Carl Jung, the titan of the collective unconscious, didn't just explore the labyrinth of the human mind. He warned us about ancestral feminine forces that silently shape our lives. Behind every broken man and every misunderstood woman, there are psychic patterns that Jung uncovered with surgical precision. His wisdom about the feminine isn't just academic theory, but a map to navigate relationships, understand self-destructive behaviors, and awaken dormant potential. What exactly was Jung trying to tell us about women, and why, decades later, do his warnings seem more relevant than ever? Deep within the psyche of every man lives a hidden feminine presence that Carl Jung called the anima. This inner woman isn't just a theory or a poetic idea. It's a powerful force that shapes how men see, feel, and relate to women in the outer world. Jung discovered this feminine part while exploring his own dreams and fantasies, noting how it appeared as various female figures that seemed to carry important messages from his unconscious mind. The anima develops in 4 main stages throughout a man's life. At first, it appears as a purely physical or instinctual connection, often linked to the mother figure. Young boys project this primitive anima onto their mothers, seeing them as all-nurturing, all-providing beings. As a man grows, his anima evolves to seek romantic and emotional connections, then intellectual and spiritual bonds. In its highest form, the anima becomes wisdom itself, a bridge to deeper meaning and creativity. What makes the anima so important in Jung's warning is how it tricks men into seeing women not as they truly are, but as mirrors of their own inner feminine. A man who hasn't recognized his anima will constantly project it onto real women, expecting them to perfectly embody his inner feminine ideal. This creates impossible expectations that no real woman could ever fulfill. The man then feels confused and betrayed when the real woman doesn't match his unconscious fantasy. Jung warned that an unacknowledged anima becomes a source of mood swings, emotional outbursts, and irrational behavior in men. When a man denies his feminine side, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground and emerges in distorted ways. He might suddenly become overly sensitive, illogical, or emotionally reactive, qualities he likely criticizes in women. These moments reveal the anima taking control of his personality without his awareness. The real danger comes when men remain completely blind to this inner woman. Such men often choose partners based entirely on how well they match their unconscious. Anima projection. The relationship seems magical at first. The woman appears to be his perfect soulmate because he's actually falling in love with parts of himself he's never acknowledged. But as reality sets in, and the real woman inevitably fails to maintain this perfect image, disappointment and resentment follow. Many men go through life repeating this pattern, falling in love with anima projections, becoming disillusioned, breaking up, and starting the cycle again with a new woman. Each failure leaves them more confused and bitter about women, never realizing they're chasing an inner image, not connecting with real people. Jung's solution wasn't to suppress or ignore the anima, but to consciously recognize and integrate it. A man who knows his inner woman doesn't expect real women to carry his projections. He can see women as they are, with their own complexities and contradictions. By accepting feminine qualities in himself, intuition, emotional sensitivity, receptivity, he no longer needs to find these exclusively in women. This integration doesn't mean becoming less masculine, but becoming more whole. Men who successfully relate to their anima often develop greater creativity, emotional intelligence, and deeper relationships. They can love women for who they actually are, not for what they represent in their unconscious minds. Jung believed that the failure to understand And integrate the anima leads not just to troubled relationships, but to a fundamental disconnect from life's meaning. The anima serves as a gateway to the deeper unconscious, to creativity, and to spiritual dimensions of existence. When men reject or remain unaware of their feminine side, they cut themselves off from these essential aspects of being fully human. In our modern world, Jung's warning about the anima remains remarkably relevant. Many men still struggle with understanding their emotional lives and projecting unconscious expectations onto women. The rise of extreme views about gender often reveals anima problems at their core. Either total rejection of feminine qualities or unhealthy idealization of women as perfect beings. Jung would see these as symptoms of men who haven't come to terms with their own inner feminine nature. Among Jung's most serious warnings was his insight into what he called the mother complex, a psychological pattern that can trap both men and women in destructive relationships with maternal energy. This isn't just about difficult relationships with real mothers. It's about how the mother archetype, the universal image of motherhood embedded in our collective unconscious, can overwhelm and consume individual development when it grows too powerful. The mother complex manifests differently in sons and daughters, but in both cases, Jung saw it as potentially dangerous to healthy psychological growth. For men, an overwhelming mother complex often creates a lifelong struggle with independence. These men find themselves oddly helpless in adult life, unconsciously seeking mother figures in their partners and remaining eternally boyish, unable to fully mature. Jung noted that men with strong mother complexes typically swing between two extremes in their relationships with women. Some become excessively dependent, needing constant nurturing and reassurance. They marry women who will mother them, cook for them, manage their lives, and make decisions for them. On the surface, they might appear devoted to women, but their devotion masks a deep inability to relate as equal adults. Others develop the opposite response. They fight against the powerful mother image by rejecting and devaluing all women. They fear intimacy because getting close to a woman threatens to activate the devouring mother complex. These men often pursue conquest rather than connection, maintaining emotional distance to protect their fragile sense of independence. For women, the mother complex creates a different but equally challenging set of problems. Some women become completely identified with motherhood, making it their entire identity at the expense of developing other aspects of their personalities. Their own needs and desires disappear behind the role of the all-giving, self-sacrificing mother. While this might seem noble on the surface, Jung warned that such extreme devotion often conceals unconscious resentment that eventually poisons relationships with children. Other women with mother complexes swing to the opposite extreme, rejecting motherhood entirely or becoming emotionally unavailable mothers. They may pursue achievements in the outer world with unusual drive and determination, often excelling in careers but struggling with intimacy and nurturing connections. Jung didn't judge this choice, but he noted that when it stems from an unresolved mother complex rather than conscious decision, it rarely brings fulfillment. The most dangerous aspect of the mother complex is what Jung called the devouring mother, the dark side of maternal care that subtly prevents children from developing independence. The devouring mother appears loving and protective, but her care conceals a need to keep others dependent. She may use guilt, health concerns, emotional manipulation, or excessive helping to maintain control over her children, partners, or others. In her life, people raised by devouring mothers often struggle with crushing guilt whenever they try to live independently. They feel responsible for their mother's happiness and well-being, believing they're being selfish if they pursue their own lives. Many remain stuck in unhappy situations because the emotional cost of disappointing mother figures feels too great. to bear. Jung observed that this pattern repeats across generations when left unaddressed. People with unresolved mother complexes often recreate the same dynamics with their own children, perpetuating the cycle. A woman who never separated properly from her own mother may unconsciously devour her children's independence. A man with a powerful mother complex may choose a devouring mother as a wife, exposing his children to the same pattern. What makes this complex so insidious is how easily it hides behind positive values like devotion, care, and family loyalty. Few people question a mother's love, even when it's suffocating growth. Jung warned that some of the most psychologically destructive relationships come disguised as the most loving ones. Breaking free of a devouring mother complex requires recognizing that true love supports independence rather than preventing it. It means distinguishing between healthy dependence and unhealthy enmeshment. For many people, this journey involves significant grief as they realize what they missed in childhood and face the pain of establishing new boundaries with loved ones who may resist change. Jung believed that understanding and overcoming the mother complex opens the door to authentic relationships based on freedom rather than unconscious needs. It allows both men and women to relate to maternal energy in a balanced way, appreciating its nurturing qualities without being consumed by them, and developing the capacity to nurture others without needing to control them. Break time. Threes. Jung's concept of the shadow represents one of his most profound warnings about human nature. The shadow contains all the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Our darker impulses, weaknesses, and qualities that contradict our self-image. For women specifically, Jung identified shadow elements that, when denied, can cause significant psychological and relational damage. The female shadow often contains aspects that society has deemed unfeminine or inappropriate for women to express. Historically, qualities like aggression, power, ambition, and sexuality were pushed into the shadow for many women. Even today, women who directly express anger or assert their needs may face criticism for being too masculine or difficult. Jung warned that these denied qualities don't simply disappear. They go underground and emerge in distorted, often destructive ways. A woman who cannot acknowledge her own anger might become passive-aggressive, manipulative, or develop psychosomatic symptoms. Unable to directly say, "I'm angry" or "I want power," the shadow finds indirect expression. These women might undermine others through gossip, sabotage relationships through subtle criticism, or express rage only when it can be disguised as concern or care for others. Jung noted that the shadow can also manifest through excessive projection onto other women. A woman who has repressed her own sexuality might become harshly judgmental of women who express theirs openly. Women who deny their competitive nature might find themselves inexplicably hostile towards successful women while claiming to support female achievement. These projections reveal the contents of the shadow more clearly than any direct confession could. The cultural emphasis on women as nurturers and caretakers creates another common shadow pattern. When the expectation to be endlessly giving and selfless becomes too dominant, natural self-interest and self-protection get pushed into the shadow. These women appear completely devoted to others, but harbor growing resentment that eventually erupts in surprising ways. Sudden relationship departures, health crises that force others to care for them, or emotional breakdowns. Perhaps most dangerous is the shadow aspect Jung called the negative mother, the capacity for emotional coldness, rejection, or even cruelty that exists alongside the nurturing instinct. Women who cannot integrate this darker side of feminine power often swing between smothering care and unexpected emotional withdrawal, creating confusion and insecurity in those who depend on them. The shadow grows stronger the more completely it is denied. Women who insist they never get angry or are always supportive of other women are often revealing exactly where their shadow is most powerful. Total identification with any positive quality, being the perfect mother, the peacemaker, the loyal friend, usually signals an equally powerful shadow counterpart fighting for recognition. Social media has created new ways for the female shadow to express itself while remaining hidden. The carefully curated online persona often represents everything a woman wishes to be, while comments, private messages, and anonymous accounts provide outlets for shadow expression. The woman who posts exclusively about positivity and support might express her shadow through harsh judgments in private groups or through consuming content filled with conflict and drama. Jung warned that women who never confront their shadows remain psychologically fragmented and prone to being overtaken by these disowned aspects in moments of stress. A lifetime of suppressing anger might culminate in a shocking outburst that destroys important relationships. Years of denying one's needs can lead to sudden, seemingly inexplicable abandonments of family responsibilities. The path to wholeness requires what Jung called shadow work, the courageous facing of these denied aspects. This doesn't mean acting out shadow impulses, but acknowledging them as part of one's complete humanity. A woman who can say, "Yes, I feel competitive sometimes," or "I'm not always naturally nurturing," paradoxically gains more control over these qualities than one who denies them entirely. Integration of the shadow doesn't mean becoming its victim, quite the opposite. It means reclaiming the energy and authenticity that get lost in maintaining a partial self-image. Women who successfully integrate shadow aspects often discover newfound assertiveness, clearer boundaries, and more honest relationships. The energy, once spent suppressing these qualities, becomes available for creative and constructive purposes. Jung's warning about the female shadow remains especially relevant in an age of carefully constructed identities and intense social pressure. More strongly a culture defines what a good woman should be, the more powerful the shadow becomes. True psychological health comes not from perfect conformity to any ideal, but from the honest integration of the full range of human qualities, light and dark, loving and fierce, nurturing and self-protective. Jung recognized that the female unconscious contains unique patterns and powers that both men and women often misunderstand. He associated feminine consciousness with lunar qualities, reflective, cyclical, intuitive, in contrast to the more linear, logical, solar consciousness traditionally associated with masculinity. This lunar aspect of the psyche operates according to its own intelligence, one that moves in cycles rather than straight lines and knows through connection rather than separation. The power of the female unconscious manifests in many forms. Women often report stronger connections to dreams, intuitive insights, and body wisdom, all channels through which the unconscious communicates. Jung noticed that women frequently served as mediators between conscious and unconscious realms, in various cultural traditions, appearing as oracles, mediums, and healers who could access deeper ways of knowing. This connection to unconscious processes gives women access to a different kind of power than the more visible, external power typically celebrated in society. Inner knowing, emotional intelligence, and the ability to sense underlying patterns are strengths that operate beneath the surface. Jung warned that dismissing these lunar qualities as mere women's intuition represents a dangerous undervaluation of essential human capacities. The female unconscious also manifests through cyclic awareness. Women's bodies literally embody cycles, menstrual cycles, pregnancy and birth, menopausal transitions, creating a lived experience of natural rhythms. This cyclic awareness extends beyond physical processes to psychological patterns of withdrawal and engagement, reflection and action, that Jung saw as essential balances to the linear progress mindset of modern civilization. Jung observed that many psychological problems arise when women are forced to suppress this lunar consciousness to function in structures built around more masculine models. Women who disconnect from their cyclic nature and intuitive wisdom often report feeling fragmented, anxious, or physically unwell. The pressure to maintain constant productivity, linear thinking, and emotional control can cut women off from their deepest sources of strength and insight. Modern workplaces and educational systems still largely operate according to patterns that privilege solar consciousness, consistent output, objective metrics, and linear development. Women who succeed in these systems often do so by developing strong solar qualities, while maintaining their lunar awareness privately or suppressing it entirely. Jung would view this split as psychologically costly for individuals and culturally impoverishing for society as a whole. The female unconscious also contains a powerful capacity for relationship and interconnection. Jung noted that women often maintain awareness of the invisible threads connecting people to each other and to the natural world. This relationship-centered consciousness serves as an essential counterbalance to the more individualistic, achievement-oriented mindset that dominates modern culture. Jung warned about the consequences of devaluing this relational intelligence. When societies dismiss women's concern with relationships as mere gossip or unimportant soft skills, they lose access to the very capacities needed to maintain community cohesion and address complex social problems. The female unconscious naturally perceives patterns of connection that more linear thinking often misses entirely. Perhaps most significant is the transformative power Jung observed in the female unconscious. Women's psyches contain profound wisdom about cycles of death and rebirth, endings and beginnings. The archetypal feminine knows that what seems like ending may be transformation, and what appears as darkness may be gestation. This capacity to trust process and transformation represents a form of courage distinct from the more visible courage of direct confrontation. When women lose touch with this transformative aspect of their lunar nature, they may become stuck in patterns of fear and control, unable to surrender to natural cycles of change. Conversely, women who maintain connection to this transformative wisdom often demonstrate remarkable resilience in the face of life's inevitable losses and transitions. In relationships, the power of the female unconscious can feel threatening to those who prefer predictability and control. Jung noted that men often simultaneously crave and fear the emotional depth and intuitive insight many women naturally access. This creates complicated dynamics where men seek close relationships with women while also trying to limit women's expression of the very qualities that attract them. Jung's warning about the lunar feminine wasn't that women should be less connected to unconscious processes, but that both men and women need to properly value these qualities. A culture that honors only solar consciousness becomes dangerously out of balance, pursuing external achievement and rational understanding while neglecting inner wisdom, emotional intelligence, and awareness of interconnection. The recovery of respect for lunar consciousness represents one of our most urgent psychological tasks. Jung would likely see many modern crises, from environmental devastation to social fragmentation, as symptoms of the collective devaluation of feminine wisdom. By recognizing and honoring the lunar intelligence that women often carry, we move towards psychological wholeness as individuals and as a society. At the core of Jung's warnings about relationships was his discovery of projection, the unconscious process where we cast parts of our own psyche onto others. In romantic relationships, these projections create a complex hall of mirrors, where men and women rarely see each other clearly, instead interacting with their own internal images projected onto their partners. This psychological mechanism lies at the root of countless relationship difficulties. Projection happens automatically and invisibly. A man who has never acknowledged his own emotional sensitivity might be inexplicably drawn to an emotionally expressive woman. He believes he loves her unique emotional depth, unaware that he's actually fascinated by exiled parts of himself that she embodies openly. Similarly, a woman might project her unexpressed creativity or intellect onto a male partner, admiring in him what she hasn't claimed in herself. The initial stages of attraction often involve an intense exchange of positive projections. Both partners feel deeply seen and understood because each is unconsciously showing the other their best potential selves. Jung called this mutual projection the divine marriage, noting how it creates feelings of extraordinary connection and completion. People describe their partners as soulmates or say, "I feel like I've known you forever." And in a sense they have, because they're partly experiencing familiar aspects of themselves. Jung warned that this projection-based honeymoon inevitably fades. As real life together progresses, the perfect image cracks. The woman who seemed to embody perfect nurturing reveals her own needs and anger. The man who appeared as the embodiment of strength shows vulnerability and limitation. Disappointment and blame often follow as both partners feel betrayed by this change in the other, though what's really happening is that projections are falling away to reveal the actual person. Even more troubling are negative projections that emerge in longer relationships. The shadow aspects we cannot acknowledge in ourselves eventually get projected onto partners, creating patterns of criticism and conflict. A woman who cannot face her own aggression might see her partner as always angry, even when his behavior is assertive rather than aggressive. A man who denies his own emotional needs might perceive his partner as too needy, projecting his disowned vulnerability onto her. These negative projections create painful double binds. Partners are criticized for qualities they may not actually possess, or that exist in much milder forms than perceived. Trying to defend against projections often only strengthens them, as any reaction gets filtered through the same distorted lens. Jung observed that many relationships break down when negative projections become so intense that partners can no longer see each other at all, just the concentrated shadows of their own unacknowledged traits. Jung identified certain common projection patterns between men and women. Men often project their anima, their inner feminine, onto female partners, then feel confused or betrayed when real women don't match this inner image. Women similarly project their animus, their inner masculine, onto male partners, expecting them to embody qualities they themselves need to develop. Both genders tend to project their shadows onto the opposite sex, creating the common phenomenon where men and women criticize each other for the very same qualities. The relationship trap becomes complete when couples engage in mutual projection and identification. Rather than seeing each other as separate individuals, they function as a self-contained system where one partner carries all of certain qualities, strength, rationality, practicality, while the other carries their opposites, vulnerability, emotion, imagination. This creates temporary stability, but stunts the growth of both people as neither develops their full range of potential. Jung didn't view these projections as something to avoid entirely. They happen naturally and serve important purposes in psychological development. The attraction stage of relationships helps us recognize parts of ourselves we've neglected or hidden. Even negative projections ultimately serve growth by showing us what we need to reclaim. The key is becoming conscious of the projection process, rather than remaining its unwitting victim. The path out of projection traps involves what Jung called withdrawing projections, the difficult work of recognizing when we're seeing our own contents in others. This doesn't happen all at once, but through gradual recognition. Maybe I'm seeing my own anger here, or perhaps I'm looking for her to provide the nurturing I need to give myself. As projections diminish, partners can begin to see each other more clearly, relating to actual people rather than internal images. Successful long-term relationships, in Jung's view, involve a continuing process of recognizing and withdrawing projections. Partners help each other see their blind spots and reclaim projected qualities. The relationship becomes a container for individual growth rather than a substitute for it. When both people commit to this process, the relationship deepens from projection-based fantasy to genuine connection between whole individuals. Jung's exploration of the masculine and feminine went far beyond biological sex or social roles. He recognized these as fundamental psychological principles existing within every human being, regardless of gender. The masculine principle, which he associated with logos, represents order, rationality, separation, and directed action. The feminine principle, which he associated with eros, embodies relatedness, receptivity, wholeness, and cyclic process. Neither is superior. Both are essential aspects of a complete human psyche. The psychological health of individuals and societies depends on the balanced integration of these opposing forces. When either principle dominates too completely, development becomes distorted. A personality or culture that overvalues masculine qualities without balancing feminine ones becomes rigid, disconnected, and ultimately destructive. Conversely, an exclusively feminine orientation that rejects masculine qualities can lack the boundaries and direction needed for effective action in the world. Jung observed that modern Western civilization had developed a dangerous imbalance, dramatically overvaluing masculine principles while suppressing and devaluing feminine ones. The emphasis on linear progress, technological dominance, rational analysis, and conquest of nature reflected an extreme expression of masculine psychology cut off from feminine wisdom. He warned that this one-sided development threatened not just psychological health, but the sustainability of civilization itself. On an individual level, Jung noticed that men and women both suffered from this cultural imbalance, though in different ways. Men were encouraged to identify completely with masculine principles, denying the feminine aspects of their own psyches. This created a generation of men who appeared strong and capable externally while remaining emotionally undeveloped and relationally unskilled. Such men often treated their own inner lives as foreign territory, projecting all things feminine onto the women in their lives. Women faced a different challenge. Living in a culture that devalued feminine principles, many women felt pressured to suppress their natural strengths and develop more masculine approaches to succeed. Others reacted by embracing an exaggerated version of femininity defined in opposition to masculine values. Both strategies represented responses to an environment hostile to balanced development. Neither allowed for the integration of both principles. The solution Jung proposed wasn't a return to traditional gender roles, but a radical reimagining of how masculine and feminine principles could be expressed by all people. He envisioned a future where men could reclaim their emotional lives, intuitive wisdom, and capacity for relationship without feeling less masculine. Similarly, women could develop reasoning power, assertiveness, and independence without abandoning feminine strengths. This integration process often unfolds through stages. Initially, people may need to reclaim devalued aspects of themselves that don't match gender expectations. A man might need to acknowledge his sensitivity and emotional needs. a woman might need to develop her assertiveness and intellectual confidence. This stage can appear as rebellion against gender norms, as people push against the boundaries that have limited them. The intermediate stage often involves overcompensation, as people enthusiastically embrace long-denied qualities. Men exploring their feminine side might temporarily swing toward extreme emotionality. Women claiming masculine power might adopt aggressive personas. Jung saw these as necessary phases, like a pendulum that must swing far in the opposite direction before finding center. The mature integration Jung envisioned manifests as flexibility rather than fixation. People who successfully integrate masculine and feminine principles can access the full range of human capacities, selecting the approach each situation requires. They can be analytical and intuitive, assertive and receptive, independent and connected, not trapped in a single mode of being defined by gender expectations. Jung warned that the journey toward psychological wholeness inevitably creates tension, both internally and in relationships. Internal tension arises as we struggle to reconcile opposing aspects of ourselves. Relational tension emerges when personal growth disrupts established patterns between partners. A man beginning to nurture his own emotional life may need less emotional caretaking from his partner. A woman claiming her authority and power may no longer play a supportive role in her relationships. These developmental shifts often coincide with midlife, when the qualities suppressed in youth demand expression. The businessman who sacrificed relationships for career success suddenly questions his values. The woman who dedicated herself to caring for others awakens to neglected talents and ambitions. Jung saw these transitions as essential to psychological development, though often painful and disruptive to established lives. For couples navigating this territory together, Jung offered the vision of relationship as container for mutual growth, rather than constraint. Partners can support each other's integration process, celebrating rather than fearing the emergence of previously undeveloped qualities. The relationship itself evolves from complementary opposition, where each person carries certain qualities for the pair, to dynamic interaction between two whole individuals. The dance of masculine and feminine principles continues throughout life, taking different forms at different stages. Jung believed that the ultimate goal wasn't perfect balance, but continuing dialogue, a dynamic interplay where neither principle permanently dominates the other. This living relationship between opposites generates the creative tension from which new possibilities emerge, both in individual lives and in culture as a whole. In the shadows of our psyche, Jung's warnings about the feminine echo with haunting relevance. As we navigate the complex territory between men and women, his insights reveal that our greatest conflicts arise not from our differences, but from what we refuse to see in ourselves. The feminine forces Jung described aren't just qualities. To understand, they're psychological powers that will shape your destiny, whether you acknowledge them or not. The question isn't whether these primal patterns influence your life, but whether you'll recognize them before they consume it. The wisdom Jung offered wasn't just academic theory, it was a map for survival in the dangerous terrain of the human soul.